Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. Now, amongst my other projects, one of the things I'm doing at the moment is prepping a Nurgle demon army for a mini tournament that myself and three mates are doing in Warhammer World in January. It's going to be 3,000 points, so I've got a fair bit to paint. If you've watched the channel already, you'll know that I've done 4 great unclean ones for this army, and now it's time to move on to the infantry. Now, typically I do a little batches of about 10 models ish, because I find that's really a good sized batch. You don't get too bored doing it, etc. But I figured if I did that, that would mean 3 solid weeks in a row doing a batch of 10 models. Probably wouldn't actually take me a whole week for 10, but I think sometimes when you know you've got a project for a week, that can stretch the project out. So I thought, right, let's push the bar out a little bit. Let's do a batch of 30 models, which is my biggest batch paint I've ever done on this channel. It's not the biggest batch paint I've ever done. That has been done way before with other things, but it's biggest on the channel. So I thought 30 models. Let's do it and let's push myself to get these done over the course of a few evenings in a week. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, and this video and this voiceover is being done on Sunday morning. I started this batch part way through the week, so it was only done over about 3 evenings, bit of time on Saturday morning, and finished them off on Sunday morning. Literally, the final stages of the video were done very early Sunday morning. I'm an early riser, so it is actually a very quick process. Now you see here, I'm setting them up on painting handles. The first batch you saw there was being put on to Redgrass Games 360 handles. 2 different types of lids, the large lid and the small lid, or the top that goes on them, and use that bit of, it's not blue tack, but it's a bit like blue tack to stick the model down. Love these handles. I have 20 of the tops, but again 30 models, so I'm using 10 of my Games Workshop painting handles as well. These are ones that for years and years I used a lot, and I've kind of drifted away from it a little bit more because I find the Redgrass that little bit more useful, and you'll see kind of why later. Now I'm just showing you my painting table, how it's set up and how I'm going to be working it, so you get a visualization of how I'm working. And how you set up your table, how you set up your workspace can really help the speed of the batch paints. If you're organized, you've got the models laid out neatly, etc., definitely can speed up your process. Now, talking about the process, I have painted plaguebearers on the channel before, but this is going to be a different scheme, because the other part of getting a batch done really quickly is thinking how the scheme's going to go together, what stages you're going to do, and kind of finessing it for partly for speed but also effect. So it's a slightly different scheme to the plaguebearers I've done before. Games Workshop contrast paint. So I've sprayed the models black here, and I've sprayed them with that Wraithbone spray because contrast goes really, really well over a light coloured spray. So I'm just rattling through the colours here. You'll see the top left on the screen, it tells you what they are. So I've done a bone colour, so it's a skeleton horde on all the bones, the horns, the teeth, those kind of things. Now moving on to a Majos purple, which is really good for these little gribbly bits where the skin's broken and you can kind of see that sort of gross Nurgle stuff coming through. Now, I did miss a couple of bits on the first stage through, so you can see here going back to the previous paint before and going on to some of the toenails and things that I forgot. Now, what I am doing when I'm doing this is I'm going through all 30 models with one colour, which means by the time you get back to the first model, the paint's generally dried. You don't have to worry about that mixing, but also one colour at a time means you're not having to open pots, you're not having to waste time doing that. And that's really the thing about batch painting, is making sure you're not wasting any time. Moving on to the black that you saw there was the contrast Black Legion. These are all again contrast. And moving on to the wood, onto the details. Now, how I lay the models out is I laid them all out so the standard plaguebearers are at the front of my batch, and at the back of the batch are the models like this with some interesting pieces. So basically by now on all of the normal plaguebearers, there's no real more work to do for a while, because I'm now going on to the character ones that have got the flesh colours you see in here onto the faces, and the wooden banners and that kind of thing. So all the other models have had their stages done for now, and now I'm working on that smaller bit of like 9-10 models at the back of how you saw my table laid out. Just an interesting point, working on the Goldman Flesh here, just showing you on the back of the heads that have decapitated heads that the Plaguebearer champion's carrying around. I did put some of that Majos purple into the kind of the gross neck bit where it's been sliced across. Now on to some of the leather strapping that's on the musician part here. And just the other point to make is, if you notice when I'm doing these models here, you can build plaguebearers in a number of different ways, and this is not a tip necessary just for plaguebearers, but you can build them in a number of ways, and you will see though that I've built them so that there's not really many parts that are blocking access. That's another part about speed. If you build your models so that you're not having to get into little nooks and crannies, definitely speeds you up. Nazdreg yellow here, and again contrast onto the hair of these the heads there, and you could do 2 or 3 different colours to give different hair and different skin tones onto these models, but again didn't want to do that, it's all about speed. Now I did come back here to a previous paint, so I took the snakebite leather and thought, actually I want some of that snakebite leather into the stitching and things that's in the mouths of the heads. Slow myself down a little bit here, but not too bad. Now moving on to a traditional paint. Now the reason I've done all of the contrast paints first is that contrast paints don't mix as well. If you make a mistake and go over the metallics here, you'd have to then rub them off, etc. But you're doing metallics afterwards. If I had made a mistake on the contrast, metallic goes straight over contrast easy. So again, bit of a speed painting idea. Now if you do make a mistake like I'm seeing here where I've put the metal onto the contrast paint, you do need to wipe that off straight away, whereas you don't need to worry about wiping the contrast off the areas you're going to put metal on, because it will cover. So again, just a little speed thing here. So a gunmetal onto most of the banner, and then a retributor armour to do the brass areas, and there are more brass areas across it. Now if you watched the channel before, you'll know that I've done my nurglings basically in this colour scheme with a slight variation. Now I didn't want to do exactly the same on the nurgling in the stomach, so I've just dropped some Rakarth flesh onto the nurglings that are bursting out of the stomach of the model. And now we're on to what you would think of the main part of the plaguebearer, the skin. So we're going to use plaguebearer flesh, again, a Games Workshop contrast paint. As I keep saying the words contrast paint, I should talk about what it does really. So contrast paint is a much thinner paint than you would see as a standard paint. It's not quite a wash, but it's kind of similar in how it flows onto a model. And what it does is it sinks into all the gaps and cracks in the model, and it flows away from raised areas. So you basically, it by itself does 2 or 3 tones across the model. So you will see a real nice skin tone effect on this, and it's a super quick way to get models done. Now you can put normal paints on top of contrast, which you will see me doing in a minute with some washes, but it's a really, really fast way of getting the paint down onto a model. Definitely not for, you know, your super painters that can do models look super realistic, but we're talking about batch painting here. We're talking about getting models on the table fast in an effective colour scheme that most people will look at and go, wow, I can't do that well. So, you know, this is not a Golden Demon winning paint scheme, and it's probably not the paint to use if you do want to win a Golden Demon, but it gives you a really nice battlefield effect. So that's what they are. Now, I suppose parallel that to the base here, so we're moving on to the brown onto the base, and I have watered this down. This is probably 50-50 watered down. But as you can see, it's not going on the base anywhere near as fast as the contrast paint does on the skin of the models. And contrast paints are a real winner when you're doing speed paints and batch paints like this. But I do think you need to do a couple of extra things with them and not just use pure contrast paints to really lift the model that little bit. Now, back onto a standard paint. This is deep yellow, so this is going over the top of the plaguebearer flesh when it's obviously fully dried into the kind of bigger pustules, and there's little kind of warty bits and stuff all over these models. I don't necessarily hit every single one with the yellow, but get a few to make the spirit of the model sort of lift up a little bit. Now it's wash time. Now this is Games Workshop's sepia shade. I do use a number of sepia shades over, you know, various different projects. In this case, the Games Workshop one gives a nice slightly dirty effect without taking too much away from the original model, and it isn't too dirty that you're going to have to do too much recovery work. So just showing you how the batch is going here. This is with the washes drying. The ones at the front at this point, they are still wet because of the speed of going through it, and it takes half an hour to an hour minimum for a wash like this to dry. But again, this was on an evening. I left it overnight to then finish. And you will notice there the sloppity bile piper in the corner that isn't at the same stage as the normal models. That's because I've included him into a certain number of the batches that we're doing, a certain number of the paint layers, but not all of them, because I want to do something different with him, and he'll feature on a different video, because I always think with your characters you might want to put a little bit more work in. So now it's about base edging. You see there, making a bit of a mistake, dropping the model on there, thankfully, no damage, nothing really happened. And again, just showing you how we're moving between these models here. Now, one of the key things when you are batch painting is keep yourself and your work area clean. Because if you're batch painting, you start getting paint all over your hands and making a mess there. When you go to pick up your next one, your next model, you're going to drop paint on it, you're going to make a mistake. So the cleaner you can work, in all cases, not just batch painting, the better. Now, here's a bit of a difference between the two different styles of paint and handle I'm doing. You can see there I started going for the paint and realised, nope, I cannot paint the base edge on a Games Workshop handle because the edge is not exposed. So again, a bit of a time saver with the Redgrass Games one, not massively, a couple of seconds here and there, but it can sort of make a bit of a difference. And if I was not using handles, having to pick up the models all the time definitely slows you down if you do get any paint there. And the other thing to consider, without a painting handle, you'll be super careful you don't rub paint off the model with your fingers. I've done a whole video on painting handles on the channel. I'll try and remember to link it down below. So now it's about getting them off the handles, you know, taking the it's not blue tack, but the similar stuff off there, packing it up, and I've given them a spray varnish of Games Workshop Munitorum spray. It was incredibly cold this morning when I did it, and you may notice some greying on the black areas from that varnish not really being shaken right, not being the right temperature. That's a mistake. It hasn't affected too much of the models though. So now finishing them off, bit of Nurgle's Rot, and if you are a Nurgle player, this is your friend, because any areas where, for example, the greying has happened, I'm dropping some Nurgle's Rot over it, it looks cool anyway, and onto the bases, and just making them tie with the rest of the army. So these are the models done. Now in total painting time, I did the math this morning, it was about 25 minutes a model-ish, something around there. So I think a really quick, really effective scheme, and when these are on the table, I think they're going to look really good alongside the rest of my army. Keep watching the channel, because I'm going to do some more for this demon army as we go on, and hopefully for a final reveal before we get into January. Cheers everybody, see you later.